Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel where we bring you the most thrilling and inspiring stories from history. Stories that transport you to faraway lands, fill your mind with wonder, and help you learn English naturally. Today, I am going to tell you a story that takes place a very long time ago, in a world without planes, without cars, without telephones. A world where maps were mostly blank, filled with drawings of dragons and sea monsters. A world where the journey from Europe to the distant lands of the East could take years and could cost you your life. But there was a boy, born in a city of canals and gondolas, who did not fear the blank spaces on the map. He dreamed of them. He dreamed of adventure, of treasure, of seeing things that no European had ever seen before. That boy would set out with his father and uncle on an epic journey along a road made of silk. He would cross burning deserts, climb towering mountains, and face bandits and storms. And he would arrive at the magnificent court of the most powerful ruler on earth, becoming a trusted envoy, an explorer, and a storyteller whose tales would change the world forever. His name is Marco Polo. How did a young merchant from Venice travel all the way to China and become a favorite of the great Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan? How did he survive dangers that would have killed most men? And how did he bring back stories that opened the door between East and West? This is a story of curiosity, of courage, and of the incredible power of a single traveler to connect civilizations. It is the story of the man who, quite literally, put China on the map. And as always, this story is a wonderful way to improve your English. You will learn vocabulary about geography, travel, adventure, and the life of a merchant. Words like caravan, expedition, envoy, voyage, terrain, oasis, empire, and route. So, pack your bags and your imagination, and let us step back in time to the 13th century. Let us begin the journey from the very start. In the year 1254, in the magnificent city of Venice, a baby boy was born. His name was Marco. Venice at that time was not part of Italy as we know it today. It was an independent republic, a powerful city-state built on a lagoon. Its streets were canals, its highways were waterways, and its heart was the sea. Venice was the marketplace of the world. Its merchants sailed to every corner of the Mediterranean, buying and selling silks, spices, jewels, and gold. It was a city of wealth, of intrigue, and of dreams. Marco's family were merchants. His father, Niccolo, and his uncle, Maffeo, were adventurous men who dreamed not just of the Mediterranean, but of the mysterious, unknown lands to the east. They had heard whispers of a great empire far beyond the horizon, ruled by a mighty Khan. They were restless souls. When Marco was just a baby, his father and uncle left on a trading expedition to Constantinople, and then they pushed further, into the Black Sea and beyond. They would not return for many, many years. Marco grew up without his father. His mother died when he was young, and he was raised by his aunt and uncle. He received a good education, learning to read, to write, to calculate sums, and to understand the tides and winds that governed a sailing ship. But he was a boy with a hole in his heart, dreaming of the father he barely remembered. He would stare out at the sea and wonder where his father was, what wonders he was seeing. Meanwhile, far, far away, Niccolo and Marco Polo were on the adventure of a lifetime. They had traveled deep into Central Asia, through lands controlled by the Mongols, the fierce horse warriors who had built the largest contiguous land empire in history. They reached the city of Bokhara, a jewel of the Silk Road. And there, they met envoys from the court of the great Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who ruled over China and vast stretches of Asia. The envoys invited them to come to the Khan's court. No European had ever been there. The Polo brothers traveled for a year to reach the Khan's summer capital, a place called Xanadu, which would later be immortalized in poetry as Xanadu. Kublai Khan, a wise and curious ruler, received them with great honor. He was fascinated by these strange men from the West. He asked them endless questions about Europe, about its kings, its popes, its laws, and its religion. He was a man hungry for knowledge, and he decided to send them back as his ambassadors to the Pope, carrying a letter requesting 100 Christian scholars to come and teach his people about the West. So, after years of adventure, Niccolò and Maffeo returned to Venice. It was the year 1269. Marco was now 15 years old. He had grown up in their absence. When he first saw his father, he did not recognize him. Niccolò was older, his face weathered by deserts and mountains, his clothes strange and foreign. But he was home. He told young Marco stories of the Great Khan, of cities of gold, of the endless plains of Asia, of the Silk Road. Marco listened with wide eyes, his heart pounding with excitement. The hole in his heart was filled not just with the joy of reunion, but with a burning desire to see these wonders for himself. The Polo brothers had a mission, to deliver the Pope's reply to Kublai Khan. It took them 2 years to prepare. Finally, in 1271, when Marco was 17 years old, they set sail from Venice. This time, they took the young Marco with them. A small boat carried them across the glittering lagoon. Marco watched the domes and towers of Venice disappear into the mist. He would not see his homeland again for 24 years. Their journey was not a single, direct trip. It was an odyssey. They first sailed to the Holy Land, to the city of Acre, to get holy oil and letters from the Pope. Then, they started the long overland trek. They joined a caravan, a large group of merchants traveling together for safety. They had camels and horses loaded with goods. They traveled through what is now Turkey, through Armenia, and into the rugged mountains of Persia. The terrain was brutal. They climbed high mountain passes where the air was thin and the cold cut through their clothes. In the deserts of Persia, the heat was like a furnace. They rode through sandstorms that blinded them and buried the path. The caravanserais, the ancient inns along the route, were their only havens, places to rest, to water the animals, and to share stories with other travelers from strange and distant lands. In the high plateau of Afghanistan, Marco fell terribly ill. The thin air, the exhaustion, and perhaps a fever brought him close to death. They had to stop for an entire year in a place called Badakhshan, a beautiful, green valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains. The clean air and rest healed him. He spent days observing the people, learning about their customs, and gaining strength. This patience, this willingness to stop and rest, was a lesson in survival. The mountain would not be rushed. Finally, they crossed the roof of the world, the Pamir Mountains. The air was so thin that even the strongest men struggled to breathe. The snowfields stretched out endlessly. It was here, Marco noted, that the Great Silk Road divided, leading to different parts of the vast Mongol Empire. Then they descended into the terrifying Taklamakan Desert, the Desert of Death in western China. Here, the sand dunes were like mountains, and the heat during the day was unbearable while the cold at night was piercing. Marco described the strange silence and the tricks of the mind the desert played, mirages of water and trees that vanished as you approached. After 3.5 years of travel, after crossing thousands of miles, after facing bandits, sickness, and starvation, Marco, his father, and his uncle finally arrived at the court of Kublai Khan. It was the year 1275. Marco was 21 years old. The Khan was now in his summer palace at Xanadu, the place of marble and gold. Kublai Khan had been waiting for the scholars the Polos had promised, but they had not come. Yet he was overjoyed to see the Venetians again, and especially intrigued by this intelligent, observant young man. Marco Polo was not just a merchant. He had a gift. He was a storyteller, a keen observer of detail. He could describe a city so vividly that the Khan felt he was walking its streets. The Khan, who ruled an empire of many languages and cultures, was deeply impressed. He made Marco one of his personal envoys. For the next 17 years, Marco Polo traveled across the vast Mongol Empire on official missions for the Khan. He went south into what is now Burma and Vietnam. He visited the bustling cities of China, like Hangzhou, which he described as the most beautiful and noble city in the world, a city of 1,000 bridges, of silk-clad ladies and rich markets. He traveled into the remote highlands of Tibet. He collected taxes, reported on the conditions of the provinces, and brought back tales of everything he saw. And what he saw was a world that Europe could barely imagine. He saw paper money, a concept completely alien to the West, where people exchanged colorful pieces of paper for real goods. He saw coal being burned as fuel, a black stone that heated homes and powered industry. He saw an imperial postal system with miles of roads and relay stations where messengers on horseback could travel hundreds of miles in a single day. He described the elegant parties, the vast hunting expeditions of the Khan with his thousands of falconers and hounds, and the incredible riches of the court. The Khan grew old, and his Polos had become wealthy. Marco, his father, and his uncle had amassed a fortune in jewels and gold. But they were homesick. They missed the canals of Venice, the smell of the sea, the sound of church bells. They begged the Khan to let them return home. The Khan, who had grown to love them, refused. He could not bear to lose his Venetian eyes and ears. Then, fate intervened. In 1292, a Mongol princess named Koko Chin was to be sent by sea to Persia to marry the Ilhan, the Mongol ruler of that region. The journey by land was too dangerous. The Polos, with their knowledge of the sea, offered to escort her. They proposed a voyage by ship, a perilous route but one they could navigate. Reluctantly, the Khan agreed. He gave them a fleet of 14 ships, a crew of 600 men, and a final mission, to deliver the princess safely. The sea voyage was a nightmare. They sailed through the South China Sea, past Sumatra, and into the vast Indian Ocean. Monsoons battered the ships. Disease broke out. One by one, the ships and the men were lost. By the time they reached the Persian port of Hormuz, only a handful of the original passengers were alive. The princess survived, and she was delivered to her new husband. The Polos had kept their promise. From Persia, they traveled overland, through Armenia, and finally reached the Mediterranean. They boarded a ship bound for Venice. It was the year 1295. Marco was 41 years old. They had been gone for 24 years. When they arrived at the doorstep of their family palazzo in Venice, wearing shabby, worn-out Mongol clothes, their own relatives did not recognize them. They were strangers in their own city, speaking Italian with a strange accent, their skin tanned by foreign suns. The family refused to let them in, thinking they were imposters. Then, as legend has it, the Polos invited all their relatives and the nobles of Venice to a grand banquet. During the meal, they stood up and, with dramatic flair, cut open the seams of their rough, travel-stained garments. And from the linings, out tumbled a glittering cascade of rubies, sapphires, diamonds, emeralds, and pearls. The hidden treasure of the East spilled onto the table. The guests were stunned. The Polos were not impostors, they were princes. The boy who had left Venice was now the richest man in the room. Marco settled into a life of wealth and trade in Venice. He might have lived out his days quietly, but another twist of fate would ensure his name echoed through history. Just 3 years after his return, Venice went to war with its great rival, the Republic of Genoa. Marco, a wealthy merchant, fitted out a galley, a warship, and personally commanded it. The battle was a disaster. The Venetian fleet was defeated, and Marco Polo was captured and thrown into a Genoese prison. It was in the darkness of that prison that Marco's greatest journey took flight. He shared his cell with a man named Rustichello de Pisa, a writer of romances and tales of chivalry. To pass the long, tedious hours, Marco began to tell stories. He told Rustichello about his travels, about the wonders of the East, about the great Khan. Rustichello was mesmerized. He saw that these were not just tales, they were a priceless manuscript. He began to write them down, in a language called Franco-Italian, mixing Marco's vivid descriptions with his own flowery style. The result was a book that they called The Description of the World, but which became famous as The Travels of Marco Polo or Il Milione, perhaps referring to the million tales he told. The book described the geography of Asia, the customs of its people, the fabulous wealth of its cities. It introduced Europe to the existence of Japan, which he called Sapangu, an island of golden temples. It described the palace of the Khan, the vastness of the desert, the strange animals like the rhinoceros, which he thought was a unicorn. It was a bombshell. No one in Europe had ever read anything like it. But many people did not believe him. The world of the Bible and ancient myths was still dominant. Marco's stories of paper money, black stones that burned, and a city where everything was made of marble seemed like fairy tales. On his deathbed in 1324, a priest urged Marco to confess his lies and recant his exaggerations. Marco, now an old man of 70, lifted his head and said, "I have not told half of what I saw." He died with the secret of the East still partially veiled, but his book continued to live. The Travels of Marco Polo became one of the most influential books in history. It was read by princes and scholars. A copy of it, heavily annotated in the margins, was found in the possession of Christopher Columbus, who used it to plan his own voyage to find a western sea route to the riches of the East. Marco's book, in a way, helped to discover America, even though that was never his intention. He had opened the door between civilizations. The Silk Road was no longer a blank space on the map. It was a path of commerce and culture. Now, what can we learn from the incredible journey of Marco Polo? First, curiosity is a compass. Marco did not travel for power or conquest. He traveled because he wanted to see, to learn, to understand. He asked questions about everything: the languages, the animals, the foods, the faiths. His curiosity made him an invaluable servant to the Khan and an immortal storyteller. Never let your curiosity die. Ask questions about the world. Every English word you learn is a new door to a new culture. Second, embrace the unknown. The blank spaces on the map terrified most people. They filled them with dragons. Marco saw them as an invitation. Stepping into the unknown is how we grow. When you try to speak a new language, you are stepping into the unknown. It is frightening, but it is also the only way to discover new worlds. Third, be a careful observer. Marco's greatest gift was his eye for detail. He didn't just see a city, he saw how its markets were organized, how its government ran, what the people ate. The more you observe, the more you learn. When you listen to English, listen closely. Notice the little words, the expressions, the way people use their bodies. A good observer becomes a good speaker. Fourth, patience is a part of the journey. The Silk Road could not be crossed in a day. It took years. Marco had to stop and heal when he was sick. He had to wait for the seasons to change. Great achievements require great patience. Learning English is not a sprint, it is a Silk Road. Some days you will move fast. Other days you will need to rest. Be patient with yourself. You will reach your destination. Fifth, the best stories are true stories. Marco's book is filled with wonder, but it is essentially a true account of his experiences. He told the world what he had genuinely seen. Your own story, your own journey of learning English, is a great story. Share your experiences. Talk about your struggles and your victories. Authenticity connects us. And finally, I have not told half of what I saw. Even after writing his massive book, Marco felt he had only scratched the surface. The world is infinitely rich. The language you are learning is infinitely rich. You will never stop discovering new words, new idioms, new cultural nuances. And that is not a reason to be frustrated. It is a reason to be joyful. The adventure never ends. Marco Polo's travels remind us that the world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page. But you do not need to cross a desert to travel. You are traveling right now, through the pages of this story, through the words of a new language. Every new phrase is a new country. Every conversation is a new city. So, pack your caravan. Mount your camel. The Silk Road of English is waiting for you. It is a long road, a hard road at times, but filled with treasures beyond your wildest dreams. Thank you for listening to this story. If it sparked your sense of adventure, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with a fellow traveler. And let me know in the comments, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why? I read every comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your curiosity burning, and never stop exploring the beautiful, unknown world around you. Bye for now.